2 days before he took his last breath, Kyle Busch posted a birthday message for his son. He wrote that Brexton had no ceiling, that the sky wasn't even a limit for what he could become. He wrote that he and Samantha were proud, genuinely proud, of the young man their boy was growing into. He wrote like someone who believed tomorrow was guaranteed. He had absolutely no reason to think otherwise. No one did. On Wednesday, May 20th, 2026, Kyle Busch walked into the Chevrolet Simulator facility in Concord, North Carolina. This was familiar ground, a place he had visited dozens of times, a controlled environment where he fine-tuned the instincts that had made him the most decorated driver in NASCAR history across all 3 national series. He strapped in behind a wheel that posed no danger. He was preparing for Sunday's race. He never came back out. Emergency crews rushed him to a Charlotte area hospital that same afternoon. The racing world didn't find out until the following morning, Thursday, May 21st, when his family released a brief, carefully worded statement. 2 words carried the weight of everything: severe illness. No details followed. No timeline, no reassurance. Across America and in racing communities around the world, people stopped what they were doing and waited. They didn't have to wait long. At 5:40 that evening, NASCAR made it official, and the confirmation was as devastating as anything the sport had ever been forced to announce. Kyle Thomas Busch, 2-time Cup Series champion, winner of 234 races across NASCAR's National Series, the most dominant and prolific competitor the sport had ever seen, was gone. He was 41 years old. The Coca-Cola 600 was still 3 days away. His name was still printed on the entry list. Now let me tell you what this video is actually going to cover. Not just the circumstances of how he died, but the full weight of how he lived. What that number 234 truly cost him. What he constructed over a lifetime of racing, what he sacrificed along the way, and what he was still fighting for long after the cameras stopped paying attention. What Samantha understood about him that the garage culture never fully grasped. What his children, Brexton and Lennox, will carry with them for the rest of their lives. The records are real, the records matter, but they are not the complete picture. So stay with us, because what comes next will change how you see everything you thought you already knew about Kyle Busch. There is a question that every extraordinary career eventually forces the world to confront, not while the wins are piling up, not in the heat of the rivalries or the roar of the crowd, but at the end, in the silence that follows, the question finally surfaces. Was this person irreplaceable? For most athletes, if you're being truly honest, the answer is no. The sport carries on, new talents rise, someone eventually breaks the records, the world adjusts and moves forward. Kyle Busch was a different kind of answer to that question. He was born on May 2, 1985, in Las Vegas, Nevada, a city philosophically designed around the belief that boldness is rewarded, that risk isn't something to run from but something to chase, and that the person willing to go all in when everyone else hesitates is the one who walks away with it all. There could not have been a more fitting birthplace for the man he would become. Because from the moment an 8-year-old Kyle Busch first climbed into a go-kart in the parking lots and cul-de-sacs of his Las Vegas neighborhood, he was never anything other than completely, unreservedly all in. 12:32 a.m. Every lap, every race, every single time, that was the only standard he held himself to. His father, Tom, was a mechanic by trade and by nature. He had uprooted his family from Randall, Illinois, alongside his wife Gay, carrying with him a particular brand of American ambition. The quiet kind, the kind that doesn't make speeches or seek recognition, but simply shows up, puts its head down, and works without end and without complaint. Tom raced locally on the weekends. It was more than a hobby, it was the part of himself that the 9-to-5 grind and the weight of monthly bills couldn't reach or diminish. His older son, Kurt, was already out there racing, already turning heads, already moving at a speed that people in the know recognized immediately as something rare, something real. And then there was Kyle, 7 years younger than Kurt, smaller in some ways, quieter in others, though quiet was always relative when it came to him. He was the kind of child who absorbed everything around him. The mechanical vocabulary his father spoke over engine blocks in the garage, the electric charge of competition that surrounded his brother, and most powerfully, the specific bone-deep hunger of someone who watches greatness from just a few feet away and decides, without fanfare, without announcing it to anyone, that they will not just match it, they will exceed it. Kurt saw it before the rest of the world had any clue. As early as 2001, long before Kyle had made a single headline, his older brother offered an assessment that, in hindsight, stands as one of the most accurate predictions in the history of the sport. He looked at Kyle and said plainly, "You think I'm a pretty good race car driver? Wait until you see my brother. He's the best driver in the family." That wasn't sentiment. That wasn't a big brother being generous. That was a professional competitor, someone who earned his living by measuring talent, looking at what stood in front of him and being honest enough to say it out loud. Kyle entered NASCAR at 16. an age when most young men are concerned with high school hallways and weekend plans. Kyle Busch was already strapping into full-bodied stock cars and racing against grown men, learning firsthand at speed what it truly cost to be fast and what it cost even more to be reliably faster than everyone else. He wasn't cautious, he wasn't patient in any traditional sense, but he was precise in the way that only the genuinely gifted can be. What looked like recklessness on the surface was underneath something deeply calculated. By 2005, at just 20 years old, he had signed with Joe Gibbs Racing and stepped into the Cup Series, the sport's highest stage. He won Rookie of the Year, and then he simply started winning everything within reach. But here is the part of Kyle Busch that the win column was never wide enough to hold. The record books can point in its direction, the trophies and standings can hint at it, but they can't fully contain what he actually did to his competition. He didn't just beat people, he made them feel beaten, and that is an entirely different thing. There was a psychological dimension to how he raced that had nothing to do with horsepower or pit strategy. He drove with a controlled, burning fury that was deeply personal. Every lap was a declaration. Every pass was another line in an argument he had been having silently, relentlessly, with doubt, with dismissal, with everyone who had ever underestimated him, since he was young enough to understand what it meant to be underestimated. And here is what most people still don't know about what that fury was actually protecting. We'll get to that shortly. He was polarizing in exactly the way that only the truly dominant can be, because mediocrity doesn't generate that kind of heat. Fans either loved him with the fierce loyalty reserved for the misunderstood, or resented him with the sharp intensity reserved for those who win too much and never once apologize for it. He built the Rowdy Nation, a following that didn't just cheer for him but claimed him, that saw in his refusal to be softened or diluted something they recognized in themselves and needed to see reflected back. He gave them a name. He gave them a nickname, Rowdy. He spent every weekend on a racetrack earning it. What's striking, looking back now, is how early everything was set in motion. Not just the talent alone has never been enough, and the history of motorsport is full of extraordinarily gifted drivers who never built anything lasting. But the entire architecture of what Kyle Busch would eventually become, the wins, the championships, the team he would own, the brand he would build, the family he would raise, all of it traces back to a parking lot in Las Vegas, to a father with oil-stained hands, and to an older brother who had already told the world exactly what was coming. Kyle Busch spent the next 2 decades proving right he would do it 234 times. 234 times. But what does it actually take to win 234 races? Not the physical demands, not the reflexes, not the stamina, not the accumulated hours in simulators and weight rooms and debrief sessions with engineers. Those are the visible costs, the ones that get filmed and celebrated and packaged into highlight reels. The real cost lives somewhere else entirely. It doesn't appear in any stat line. It can't be framed and hung on a wall. The real cost is what you have to become in order to get there. Kyle Busch arrived at Joe Gibbs Racing in 2005 as a 20-year-old from Las Vegas who had already won Rookie of the Year in the Cup Series with Hendrick Motorsports and had still been shown the door. Let that land for a second. The man who would go on to become the sport's all-time wins leader across all 3 national series was released before he was old enough to legally have a drink. Discarded. Let go with the kind of institutional rejection that doesn't just sting, it has a way of making young men question everything they ever believed about themselves. It ends careers before they have the chance to begin. Kyle Busch did not go home and question himself. He recalibrated. At Joe Gibbs Racing, inside one of NASCAR's most disciplined and resource-rich organizations, something that had always existed in Kyle began to sharpen into something impossible to ignore. He wasn't simply fast. He was comprehensively fast on superspeedways and road courses, fast on short tracks and mile-and-a-half intermediates, fast in scorching heat and pressure-soaked final laps with everything hanging in the balance. Most drivers carry a signature strength alongside a known weakness. Kyle Busch operated as though the concept of weakness was a language he had never learned to speak. The wins came quickly, then they came constantly. He won the Coca-Cola 600 in 2018, the longest race on the NASCAR calendar, 500 miles of relentless focus and physical endurance beneath the lights at Charlotte Motor Speedway. When he climbed out of that car in victory lane, he didn't look like a man who had simply won a race. He looked like a man who had decided on an outcome weeks earlier and then methodically refused to allow anything else to happen. That win carried extra weight because Charlotte was effectively home territory, a place where the crowd held strong, complicated, and deeply divided opinions about him. He answered every single one of those opinions in the only language that has ever mattered on a racetrack: forward motion. But it's the championships where the true scale of what he built becomes undeniable. 2015, the first Cup Series title. It didn't arrive cleanly, and nothing about the road leading to it suggested it would. In previous seasons, Kyle had finished as low as 18th in the standings. He had been brilliant and then inconsistent, dominant, then derailed. He was exactly the kind of driver whose ceiling was so visibly, almost painfully high that the distance between that ceiling and his actual results in certain years felt almost impossible to explain. Then 2015 arrived, and everything converged at once. The team clicked, the car performed. But most importantly, something internal had shifted, the kind of emotional steadiness that can't be coached or manufactured, that only comes from having lived through enough failure to fully understand what it costs, and to decide with full clarity that it is worth every bit of that cost. He became Cup Series champion, and in doing so, he didn't just win a title. 12:35 a.m. Champion, the boy from Las Vegas. The kid who had been released at 20 and told, in the most institutional way possible, that he wasn't quite ready. If the 2015 title was the arrival, the 2019 championship was the confirmation. It couldn't be explained away as a prodigy catching lightning in a bottle. It couldn't be filed under fortunate timing or perfect circumstances. A second title earned 4 years later was the sport itself agreeing formally, publicly, undeniably, that what Kyle Busch was doing inside those race cars was not a streak or a phase or a favorable alignment of variables. It was mastery. Plain and settled. And then there were the other series. The Truck Series, the Xfinity Series. The parallel careers that most Cup champions treat as minor obligations, brief appearances to satisfy sponsors and fulfill contractual fine print. Kyle Busch treated them as genuine competitions because to him every race was a genuine competition. There was no such thing as a throwaway weekend. He collected 69 victories in the Truck Series and 102 in what is now known as the Xfinity Series, both records. Both sitting so far beyond the reach of any active driver that calling them untouchable isn't hyperbole, it's just arithmetic. He wasn't making appearances, he was dominating at every level the sport offered. He was also in the process making enemies, and that was entirely by design. The rivalries were genuine. Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Denny Hamlin, his own teammate for years. Kevin Harvick, the man who on the night of May 21st would say he absolutely could not process what had happened, whose grief carried the particular texture of someone who had lined up against Kyle Busch for 2 decades and understood with full precision exactly what the sport had just lost. These were not ordinary competitors. These were historic drivers, men who will be discussed and debated for generations. And yet every one of them found in Kyle Busch something they had never quite encountered anywhere else. Because Kyle didn't simply race against you, he raced at you. There was a personal dimension to the way he competed that transformed every rivalry into something beyond lap times and point standings. You weren't just trying to beat a fast driver. You were trying to beat a conviction, the deep, structural, unshakable belief that Kyle Busch carried into every race, on every track in every series that said, I am the best driver here, prove me wrong. Nobody could, not consistently, not enough. Kyle Busch Motorsports added an entirely different dimension to who he was. He could have spent his off-seasons the way most drivers at his level do: sponsor appearances, charity golf events, the comfortable and predictable rhythms of athletic celebrity. Instead, he built something. He recruited young drivers. He looked at William Byron, a teenager from Charlotte with raw talent, visible nerves, and no guarantees, and gave him a seat. He did the same for Christopher Bell. He created genuine pathways into the sport for the next generation, not by offering easy praise or lowering the bar, but by refusing to lower it at all, by insisting that the only way into the sport that had shaped him was through the door of real, serious, uncompromising preparation. On the night of May 21st, William Byron posted 4 words that carried the weight of an entire legacy. He helped shape me. That is the architecture of a man who understood that everything the sport had given him came with a debt, and who spent years quietly paying it forward. But before this story moves forward, here is the question worth sitting with. With 234 wins, 2 championships, a team he built from scratch, a brand, a family, a legacy already carved permanently into the record books, what exactly was left to prove? The answer to that question explains everything that came next. Say it slowly, let the number actually settle. 234 victories across NASCAR's 3 national series, not rounded up, not padded by favorable scheduling or the sport's generosity toward the persistent. 234 times, Kyle Busch took the checkered flag first. The math carried no asterisks, and the argument it settled had no reasonable counterpoint. No driver in the history of NASCAR's national series has done it more. Not Richard Petty, not Dale Earnhardt, not Jeff Gordon, not Jimmy Johnson, not any of the names the sport reaches for when it wants to talk about greatness at its absolute ceiling. 12:37 a.m. Kyle Busch, the kid from Las Vegas who was released at 20, the polarizing force that half the garage wanted desperately to beat, and the other half quietly feared they couldn't, stands entirely alone at the top of a mountain that took him 22 seasons to climb, and that no one currently racing shows any credible path toward reaching. But here is the question the number itself cannot answer. What did 234 wins actually cost? Because this is the truth the record books leave out. Dominance at this level is not free. It is not the natural output of talent deployed effortlessly by someone who found everything simple. Dominance at this level is a transaction, and the currency is everything else. The missed dinners, the Sundays surrendered not to family, but to 500-mile battles at 200 miles per hour against 40 other drivers who want exactly what you want and will not step aside. The physical toll of G-forces absorbed by a human body week after week, season after season, the kind of punishment that doesn't announce itself dramatically, but accumulates silently in the joints and the spine and the neck and all the places that medical reports never fully account for. The psychological burden of being permanently measured against your own peak. Because when you are the standard, every finish that isn't a victory becomes, in some corner of the conversation, a version of failure. Kyle Busch understood that transaction completely. He made it consciously. He made it repeatedly. And in making it, he produced something that will outlast every controversy, every rivalry, and every critical word ever written about his personality or his methods. He produced a body of work that simply cannot be argued with. 63 Cup Series victories. In context, that number places him 9th on the all-time list, mentioned in the same breath as the figures who define the sport's entire historical identity. And he was still competing, still chasing number 64. He was in his 22nd full-time Cup Series season in 2026, driving for Richard Childress Racing in a partnership that had faced real challenges, criticism, a winless drought stretching back to June of 2023. And still he showed up. Still he qualified on the pole for the Daytona 500 in February 2026, the sport's most iconic event, the race that opens every new season like a formal announcement, and put his car at the front of the field and told everyone watching without needing to say a word, "I am still here. I am still the one to beat." That pole at Daytona was not ceremonial. It was not the sport being sentimental about a legend in his final chapter. It was earned. It was fast. It was Kyle Busch at 40 years old being categorically quicker than drivers half his age on the biggest stage the sport has. His Truck Series record, 69 wins, sits so far beyond what anyone else has accomplished in that series that calling it a record almost undersells it. It feels like a separate category of achievement, one that exists solely because Kyle Busch refused to treat any race in any series as anything less than a legitimate opportunity to win. The concept of going through the motions, of coasting, of showing up without full intent, it simply wasn't something his mind would allow. 102 victories in the Xfinity Series, also a record, also untouchable on any foreseeable trajectory. His final Truck Series win came on May 15th of this year, 6 days before he died. He won the EcoSave 200 for Spire Motorsports, climbed out of that truck in victory lane, and did what he had always done: celebrated, thanked his crew, performed the rituals of winning that he had performed more times than any other human being in the history of his sport. 6 days later, he was gone. There is something almost unbearable about that proximity. 6 days between a victory celebration and a hospital in Charlotte. 6 days between the last time he stood in a winner's circle and the last time he stood anywhere at all. The sport that had defined every chapter of his life gave him one final win, as though it understood something in whatever way sports can understand things that none of us could yet see. It was offering a closing statement. And the closing statement was a win, not a top 10, not a solid run, a win. Kyle Busch's final race in any NASCAR series ended in victory lane. He never knew it was the last one, but he had spent 22 years practicing exactly what to do when the moment arrived. The answer had long since stopped being a decision and become something deeper: instinct, identity, the most essential truth about who he was. When the moment came, he won. But there was a life beyond the track. A life that statistics cannot measure and record books cannot hold. A woman who had stood beside him through all of it. 2 children who would grow up carrying his name, his eyes, and the particular weight of having been loved by someone that extraordinary. That life, the one lived away from cameras and checkered flaw. GS and the noise of 100,000 people in the grandstands, is where Kyle Busch stops being a record and becomes a man. There is a version of Kyle Busch that the garage knew well. Helmet on, visor down, jaw set, hands on the wheel at 200 miles per hour with 40 competitors trying to take what he came to claim. That version was documented exhaustively, analyzed, debated, criticized, celebrated, and feared in equal measure. But there was another version entirely, and that version belonged to Samantha. They met when Kyle was already famous, already rowdy, already the personality NASCAR couldn't stop talking about, already the driver that other competitors quietly measured themselves against, even when they'd never say so out loud. Samantha Sheets was not impressed by any of that surface noise. She was sharp, grounded, and possessed of the kind of perception that cuts straight through the performance to the person underneath. She saw Kyle Busch, not the record, not the brand, not the public lightning rod, and she chose him anyway. They married in 2010. What followed was not simply a love story. It was a construction project, the kind that requires two people who understand that what they're building together will outlast any single season, any title, any number on a win counter. Samantha did not stand at the edge of the track and wait for her husband to come home. She built. She founded Rowdy Energy, a beverage brand that grew from a concept into a nationally distributed company built on the same relentless drive that defined Kyle's racing, but expressed entirely in her own voice through her own vision by her own hand. She didn't live in his shadow. She built alongside him in full. And then came the children. Brexton Locke Busch arrived in 2015, the same year Kyle claimed his first Cup Series championship. Consider the particular weight of that year, a title and a son, the two most significant victories of Kyle Busch's life arriving in the same 12 months, as though certain chapters are simply meant to be written in large letters. Brexton was not just a child to Kyle. He was a mirror, a living reflection of everything Kyle had been at that age. The hunger was already visible in a boy who had barely learned to walk before he wanted to race. And then Lennox Harvey Busch came. Final sentence from Dale Earnhardt Jr. That the two of them had found a way to become friends carries more weight than any win total ever could, because it doesn't tell us who Kyle Busch had been. It tells us who he was becoming. It tells us that the man who spent 22 years as the most polarizing figure in his sport had been doing something quieter, harder, and ultimately more significant than winning races. He had been doing the work of becoming someone that even his fiercest critics could reach toward, not through a press release, not through a carefully managed reputation shift. Simply through the slow, unglamorous, deeply human work of being willing to be known, to be fallible, to set down the armor long enough for another person to walk through. The records were always going to stand on their own. The records required only speed and will, but the friendships, those required something entirely different. Those required courage of a different kind. Kyle Busch was doing that work. And now the work is finished. Here is what he leaves behind. Stated plainly, because plainness is what this moment deserves. He leaves 234 victories that no active driver is within any credible reach of. He leaves 2 Cup Series championships. He leaves a Truck Series team that gave William Byron his first professional seat and Christopher Bell his earliest platform, and an entire generation of young drivers who carry his influence in their instincts whether they are fully aware of it or not. He leaves Rowdy Energy, Samantha's company, their shared brand, a business that will continue operating and growing and employing people who depend on it. He leaves Brexton, who is already fast, already hungry, already the kind of competitor that makes coaches lean forward when he's on the track. He leaves Lennox, who will grow up knowing her father through footage and testimony and the living memory of everyone whose life he touched. He leaves Samantha, who is not a footnote in this story, but a full and essential chapter of it. A woman who built something real and enduring alongside a man the world found complicated, and she found worth everything. And he leaves a question the sport will be sitting with for decades. Not about cause of death, not about what happened inside that simulator on a Wednesday afternoon in May, but the larger question, the one that surfaces when something irreplaceable disappears from the world without warning, without preparation, without the gradual dimming that gives people time to begin their grieving before the end arrives. What do we do with something this complete? 234 wins, 2 championships, a team, a brand, a family, a final victory 6 days before the end, a birthday message 2 days before the end, his name still printed on a race entry 3 days after the end. Kyle Thomas Busch was born on May 2, 1985, in Las Vegas, Nevada. He died on May 21, 2026, in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was 41 years old. He was in his 22nd season. He was still fast. He was still competing. He was still, by every honest measure available, the one to beat. He did not get to say goodbye. None of them do, the ones who leave like this, suddenly in the middle of everything, with the next race already on the calendar and the car already prepped and the family already making plans for Sunday. But 2 days before he left, he told his son there was no limit to what he could accomplish. That is not a goodbye. That is a beginning, a declaration carried forward from one generation to the next, held now by a boy who has his father's eyes and his father's hunger, and an entire lifetime ahead of him to make it true. The number is 234. No one will reach it, not soon, perhaps not ever. But somewhere out there right now, a kid in a go-kart is trying. Kyle Busch would have wanted it exactly that way. If you were part of the Rowdy Nation, if you were there for the wins, the rivalries, the moments that made this sport impossible to turn away from, leave a comment below. Tell us your favorite memory. Tell us what he meant to you. This community is how legacies stay alive. If this story moved you, subscribe to Golden Fame News. Because the stories that matter, the ones about what extraordinary people truly cost and what they genuinely leave behind, are the stories we are here to tell. Which legend should we cover next? Let us know below.